Snow fell without mercy over Aspen that December night, thick and silent. The kind of snow that erases the world and replaces it with something that looks almost sacred. The Grand Aurora Hotel rose from the white like a cathedral, all pale stone and blazing light, its crystal windows throwing gold across the buried street below. Inside, the charity gala was in full swing. Strings of champagne flutes, men in dark tuxedos, women draped in silk and diamonds. The quiet roar of money moving between hands under the guise of generosity. Nobody noticed the woman standing at the edge of the marble lobby. She wore a wool coat the color of old ash, damp at the hem from the walk through the storm. Snow still clung to the laces of her boots. She looked around the room with careful, searching eyes, not frightened, not confused, but looking for something specific. Someone specific. Then the music pulled back for just a moment, and the sound of heels on marble was very loud. 2 security guards moved toward her from opposite sides of the room. "Ma'am." One of them, broad-shouldered, his face professionally blank, stepped directly into her path. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, in a low, clear tone, "I'm looking for someone. You'll need to look somewhere else." Most of the room glanced over, then away. A few guests exchanged knowing half smiles. A woman in a burgundy gown murmured something behind her champagne glass, and her companion laughed softly. At a table near the back of the room, a man set down his drink and watched. He was not like anyone else at the gala. He wore a jacket that had been pressed but not recently bought. His hands, wrapped around a glass of water rather than wine, were the hands of a man who worked with them faint calluses, a small scar along the left knuckle. He had been watching the door for the last 20 minutes, calculating the fastest route to it. He was a single father from a town 40 minutes outside of Aspen, and he had no business being here. His old friend Marcus had sent him the invitation 6 weeks ago with a handwritten note. "Just come. One night. You need it." He had not wanted to come. He had come anyway, and he had been trying to leave for most of the evening. Now he was watching a woman being dragged toward the door in front of a room full of people who were looking carefully away. He stood up. Nobody saw him do it at first. He was quiet about it, no chair scraping, no announcement. He just rose, straightened his jacket, and walked. Nathan Cole had learned a long time ago that belonging somewhere and being somewhere were 2 entirely different things. He had learned it the first time at his ex-wife's family Christmas, standing in a living room full of lawyers and architects while holding a plate of cheese and trying to remember the name of the man he was speaking to. He had learned it again when he drove his daughter Emma to her first day at the private school his ex-wife had insisted on, watching the other fathers in their clean SUVs and feeling like something that had been dropped there by accident. But those times had at least involved people who knew him. This was different. Tonight, he was surrounded by 500 strangers who all seemed entirely confident that they deserved to be exactly where they were, and Nathan had not yet figured out how to feel that kind of confidence in a borrowed tie. The Grand Aurora Hotel was the most expensive building Nathan had ever stood inside. He had noticed the floor's first marble, so polished he could see the inverted blur of his own reflection, walking slightly ahead of him like a preview of where he was about to go. Then, the chandeliers, which were not chandeliers so much as small galaxies, suspended from the ceiling, casting light that made everyone below look expensive. He had arrived early because he was always early, a habit left over from years of opening the garage at 6 a.m. before the mechanics arrived. He had collected a glass of water, found a table near the back, instinctively near an exit, and had spent the next 2 hours performing the subtle work of being invisible at a party where everyone else was performing the subtle work of being seen. His friend, Marcus Whitfield, had found him within the first 20 minutes, clapped him on the back with genuine warmth, introduced him to 3 people whose names Nathan immediately forgot, and then been swept away by the undertow of the evening. Nathan had not blamed him. Marcus lived in this world, now he had married into it, built a small private equity firm, and wore confidence like a second skin. They had grown up in the same neighborhood in Denver, working summers at the same mechanics shop. But Marcus had always been going somewhere different. Nathan had always known that. He had loved him for it and felt, occasionally, the particular loneliness of watching a good friend become someone you have to make an appointment to see. The table Nathan had chosen seated 8. 7 of the chairs were empty. At some point, a man named Gerald had sat across from him and spoken at length about a ski resort development in Utah before drifting away toward the bar. After that, Nathan had been alone, which was fine. He was good at alone. He was watching the door because Emma had texted him at 8:30. Just 3 words. Dad, forgot. Key. His neighbor Patricia was covering she had the spare, but the text sat in the back of his mind the way his daughter always sat in the back of his mind. Present, pulling slightly, like a compass needle that never quite settled. He was going to find Marcus, say goodbye, and be on the road by 9:30. That was the plan. He was watching the door when the woman in the wool coat came through it. He noticed her immediately, and not because she stood out in an obvious way. It was subtler than that. She moved through the lobby entrance with the stillness of someone who had learned to take up very little space. But her eyes were quick and deliberate. She was looking for something. Not lost, not confused. The coat was wrong for the room. The boots were wrong. The snow melting from her hem was wrong. But her face was entirely composed. Nathan had a daughter. He had spent 8 years learning to read the difference between fine and fine, between a child who was okay and a child who was working very hard at seeming okay. He saw that difference now, in a woman who was clearly an adult, in a room full of people who were choosing not to see it. The guards moved in from both sides with the efficiency of people who had done this before. Nathan put down his glass. He did not make a decision exactly. It was more that a decision had already been made somewhere quieter than his thoughts, and he was simply catching up to it. The guard's name, stitched on his breast pocket in small gold letters, was D. Hartley. He was not unkind by nature. Nathan would understand this later, looking back, but he had a job to do, and he was doing it. And the job required a certain decisive quality that did not leave room for hesitation. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." His hand closed around her upper arm, just above the elbow. Not roughly, but firmly, the grip of someone who had practice steering people toward doors. The second guard, younger, took a flanking position just behind her left shoulder. The woman did not pull away. That was the first thing Nathan noticed from across the room. She didn't fight it. She turned her head and said something to the first guard, her voice quiet enough that Nathan couldn't hear the words from where he was, only the tone. Measured, patient, not pleading. The guard shook his head. She said something else. The guard's expression didn't change. A cluster of guests near the champagne table had turned to watch, with the detached interest of people observing a minor incident that had nothing to do with them. A woman in a silver gown said something to her companion that made him smile. Near the string quartet, a man in his 60s glanced over once and then directed his attention deliberately back toward his conversation. The way you pull your eyes away from something you've decided not to know about. Nathan was already moving. He didn't walk quickly. There was no drama in it, no striding through the crowd, no theatrical purpose. He simply walked at his usual pace, steady and straight, toward the door where the 2 guards were maneuvering a woman in a wet wool coat out of a room where everyone had already forgotten she existed. He arrived before they reached the door. He stepped into their path, not blocking them aggressively, just standing there, in the way, with the calm of someone who has not yet considered the possibility of moving. The first guard stopped. He looked at Nathan with the mild, professional irritation of a man who has been interrupted doing something he was certain was correct. "Sir, stop," Nathan said. One word. Quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't need volume because it isn't afraid of anything. The guard's jaw tightened slightly. "Sir, this woman is not a registered guest of this event. I need to ask you to. She's with me." 3 words. Nathan said them the way he said most things, simply, without performance, the way you state something you are not uncertain about. He had no idea who she was. He had never seen her before in his life. He would think about that later, driving back down the mountain in the snow, and he would not be able to entirely explain it even to himself. The room, or at least that corner of it, had gone very quiet. The guard looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the woman. Then back at Nathan. "Do you know this woman? Does it matter?" A pause. The guard's grip on her arm loosened, fractionally. He was recalibrating. This was outside the normal script of these situations, and normal scripts were all he had. A man calmly claiming a woman he clearly did not know, in a room where half the people were watching now, was a variable he had not been prepared for. The woman herself was looking at Nathan. Her expression was difficult to read, not shocked exactly, more like someone who has been surprised by something so completely that the emotion hasn't quite caught up yet. Her eyes were gray, or close to it. Her coat had a small tear along one pocket, barely visible, the kind of thing you would only notice if you were standing close. Nathan met her gaze for a moment. He gave a small nod, the kind that means just follow along. The guard released her arm. He did it slowly, with the careful dignity of a man who wanted it understood that this was a professional concession and not a defeat. "I'll need your name," he said to Nathan. "Nathan Cole. And you're confirming this woman is your guest?" "Yes." The guard looked at him for another long second. Then he stepped back. The younger guard stepped back too. The small drama of it was over, as quietly as it had started. Nathan turned to the woman. He gestured, very slightly, back toward the room. "Would you like to sit down?" he said. They were not the center of attention for long. That was the nature of rooms like this. Something small and human happened at the edges, and the center went on revolving around itself. By the time Nathan had walked back to his table with the woman beside him, the string quartet had resumed, the champagne glasses had refilled, and most of the people who had watched were already talking about something else. A few were not. Nathan felt the eyes without looking for them. He was practiced at not performing for observers. He pulled out the chair beside his, the one that had been empty all evening, and waited. She sat. He sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the room settled around them like water finding its level. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it." "I don't." She paused, reorganized. "Honestly?" He turned his water glass slowly on the tablecloth. "I wasn't thinking much." That was more true than she might have believed. Nathan had spent most of his adult life making decisions the way he diagnosed an engine by feel, by some internal register that bypassed the part of his brain that overthought things and went straight to the part that knew. He had not thought I should help this woman. He had simply moved, the way you catch something that is falling before you've decided to catch it. She looked around the room, a slow and careful survey. Whatever she had been looking for when she arrived, she had not yet found it, or perhaps she had decided to stop looking for now. "I'm Elena," she said. "Nathan." "I know." She glanced at him. "They asked your name, right?" He had forgotten that. "Who were you looking for?" She was quiet for a moment. "Someone who appears to have left early. I'm sorry." "It's all right." She looked at him directly then, with the kind of frankness that some people have when they're tired of performing social niceties. "Did you think I belonged here?" Before you, she tilted her head toward the door. Nathan considered the question seriously, the way he considered most questions. "I thought it didn't matter whether you did or not." She studied him. "That's an unusual thing to think." "Maybe." He looked at the room, the long tables, the flowers, the people. "I don't really think I belong here either." "Then why are you here?" "Old friend invited me." He paused. "I've been trying to leave for an hour." She laughed. It was small and genuine, the kind of laugh that escapes before you've decided to laugh, and she pressed her fingers briefly to her lips as if surprised by it. Then she lowered her hand and looked at him with an expression that was something warmer than assessment and something cooler than warmth, sitting precisely in the space between. "So you stayed long enough to get me thrown out," she said. "Long enough to get you not thrown out," he corrected. Another silence. Outside, the snow was pushing against the tall windows in sheets, and the light inside the hotel made the storm look almost beautiful from where they were sitting. A waiter appeared. Elena ordered sparkling water, which Nathan noticed. He ordered nothing. "What is it you do, Nathan?" she asked. "I run an auto repair shop." He said it the way he said everything, with no particular apology for it. "Town called Garfield. 40 minutes east of here. A garage, more or less." She nodded, as if this was information she was cataloging, not judging. "And the old friend who invited you, does he know you've been trying to leave since you arrived?" "Probably. Marcus knows me pretty well." She turned her water glass in her hands, mirroring what he had done without seeming aware of it. "Do you have family waiting? Is that why you want to go?" He looked at her. "A daughter. She's 8. She's with a neighbor tonight, but—" He shrugged, a small motion. "I'm always somewhere between where I am and where she is." Elena was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow fell. "That's a good kind of compass to have," she said finally. He looked at her, and for the first time that evening, Nathan Cole felt something other than the desire to leave. The gala moved around them the way rivers move around stones. People swept past their table, laughing, gesturing, clustering, and dispersing. Elena and Nathan stayed where they were, speaking in the unhurried way of two people who have, without quite deciding to, temporarily removed themselves from the obligations of a room. She was not what he expected, though Nathan would have been hard-pressed to say what he had expected from a woman in a wet wool coat who had walked through a blizzard to find someone at a charity gala and then stayed perfectly composed when 2 guards put their hands on her. He had expected either fragility or confrontation, the 2 reactions that situation typically produced. She had offered neither. She asked about the garage, and he answered honestly that he had bought it from his mentor, Dave Kellerman, 6 years ago, that it had been struggling when he bought it and still struggled now, that he had 2 full-time mechanics and 1 part-timer, and that the part-timer had been part-time for 3 years because Nathan kept hoping the business would grow enough to make the position permanent. And it kept almost doing that. That the hours were long and the margins were thin, and most months he was fine and some months he was not fine, and he had learned not to think too far ahead. She listened in the way that people who are genuinely listening listen, without planning her response while he was talking, without nodding in the overly rhythmic way of people performing attention. She just listened. "And Emma," she said. 8 years old. 8 3/4, according to her. A corner of his mouth moved. "She's very precise about the fractions. Smart kid. Too smart." He said it with the particular warmth of a parent who means it entirely as a compliment. "She reads constantly. She'll read anything: cereal boxes, instruction manuals, the back of receipts. Last week, she read the entire owner's manual for my truck and then informed me I'd been using the wrong grade of oil." "Had you been?" "No." He paused. "But she wasn't wrong to check." Elena smiled. It changed her face, not dramatically, but the way the light changes when a cloud moves. "She sounds extraordinary." "She is." He said it simply. "The way people state things that are just true. She's the reason I get up in the morning. Literally, she wakes me up at 6 because she wants to make sure I make coffee before she has to leave for the bus." "Does she like school?" "Loves it. Except gym," he considered. "And one teacher she calls Mr. Droning, which is not his actual name but is not entirely unfair either." Elena laughed again. This time she didn't try to catch it. She let it happen, and it lasted a half-second longer, and Nathan noticed this without examining why he noticed it. "What about you?" he said. "Who were you looking for tonight, if you don't mind my asking?" The lightness shifted. Not disappeared, she didn't retreat behind a wall, but it changed. The way a conversation changes when it turns toward something real. "My father's business partner," she said. "A man named Douglas Crane. There was something I needed to speak with him about. He's the kind of man who doesn't return calls. You have to catch him somewhere he can't leave. And he left anyway. He left anyway. I'm sorry. It's all right. She looked up. It's been a strange evening, but not entirely a bad one. He didn't say anything to that. There wasn't much to say, but he stayed where he was, and she stayed where she was. And outside the blizzard pressed against the crystal windows of the Grand Aurora Hotel and was perfectly, beautifully ignored. It was a waiter who interrupted them, arriving to clear the glasses, and behind the waiter came a man Nathan didn't recognize. 50s, silver-haired, the easy carriage of someone who had been important for long enough that it no longer required effort. He stopped at the edge of the table and looked at Elena with an expression that was hard to read. Then, his face changed. "Miss Ward," he said, and the room around them began to shift. His name was Thomas Aldrich. Nathan would learn this later. He was the managing director of a private fund based in Denver, a man who had attended 17 consecutive annual galas at the Grand Aurora without ever once sitting at the back table nearest the emergency exit. He was the kind of man for whom Miss Ward was not a name but an entire calculation. The way he said it quiet, calibrating, was the first signal. Across the room, someone else heard it. A woman in her 40s with sharp posture and a glass of red wine going still in her hand. Then, a man near the bar, turning his head with the practiced subtlety of someone who has trained himself to track certain names the way hunters track sound. Elena looked at Thomas Aldrich with the expression of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen and had already decided how she felt about it. "Thomas," she said, "it's good to see you." He recovered quickly, powerful men do. "I didn't know you were attending tonight. Your father didn't mention. He doesn't always mention everything." A pause. Thomas Aldrich looked at Nathan, a brief, instinctive inventory. Then, back at Elena. "Of course. Well, it's wonderful to have you here." He reached out and shook her hand with both of his, which was not something he had done when he'd walked up. "Can I get you anything? Is there someone I should—" "I'm fine. Thank you." Her tone was not cold. It was precise. Thomas Aldrich withdrew, moving back into the room with the speed of a man who wanted to be the first to make several phone calls. Nathan watched him go. Then, he looked at Elena. She was looking at her water glass. "Ward," Nathan said. She looked up. "Elena Ward." He said it not as a question, but as the process of understanding arriving. "As in Ward Global Holdings." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He knew the name most people in Colorado did. Alexander Ward was not a man who appeared in the news often, but when he did, it was at the level of summits and legislation, of buildings being named and funds being created, of the kind of wealth that had been old long enough to have become something more than money. The Ward Global Holdings headquarters in Denver was a building Nathan had driven past 400 times without ever having a reason to think about the people inside it. Elena Ward. The daughter. "You walked here?" Nathan said. She blinked slightly. "What?" "Through the storm. You walked. Or you walked part of the way your boots." He glanced at them. "Nobody walked you to the door. There was no car waiting outside. You came in alone." He paused. "Why?" She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully translate. "Because I didn't want anyone to know I was coming," she said. "Including your father." "Including my father." He nodded. He didn't press it. It wasn't his business, and he had the instinct developed from years of working with people in the specific vulnerability of broken things not to push at the edges of a door that wasn't his to open. Around them, the room had begun to rearrange. It was subtle but unmistakable, the gravitational shift that happened when a piece of information entered a social space and redistributed its weight. People were moving, not running, not staring, but angling, drifting, finding reasons to be near a table where they had not previously found reasons to be. Richard Blake appeared first. He was a large man in his early 60s, with the particular bluster of someone who had never had to learn restraint because restraint had never been required of him. He had been, 40 minutes earlier, the man who had stood at the edge of their table and said, loud enough for people nearby to hear, that security had made a mistake letting the woman in the wool coat stay. He had said it with the comfortable certainty of a man who was certain his certainty was the ceiling. He arrived at their table now with his hands out, his face rearranged into warmth. "Elena, what a wonderful surprise. I had no idea you'd be, Richard." Her voice was entirely pleasant. "You were just here a little while ago, weren't you?" A fractional pause. "Was I?" "I've been moving around all evening. You said security had made a mistake." She looked at him with the same clear gray eyes she had turned on Nathan 40 minutes ago, only there was no warmth in them now, only accuracy. "Letting me stay," the silence that followed had texture to it. Richard Blake's prepared warmth held its shape for a second longer than was comfortable, and then it cracked, just barely, at the edges. Nathan watched it happen and felt something cold and specific move through him. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. He had seen it happen before. Not in rooms this expensive, but the mechanism was the same he had seen it at school fundraisers when a teacher arrived who was more popular than expected, at the garage when a customer turned out to know someone important, in the particular social alchemy of small towns, where the value assigned to a person could shift in a moment based on information about who they knew or what they owned. It was ugly every time. The speed of it was the ugliest part. Richard Blake finished his recovery with the determination of a man who could not afford to let the moment pass without salvaging something. He laughed a brief, processed sound and said something about how he'd been distracted all evening and he hoped Elena would forgive any confusion. And he extended his hand. She shook it. Her face remained entirely pleasant and entirely closed. Then came the others. Thomas Aldrich returned with a woman Nathan hadn't seen before. Someone with the smooth efficiency of an assistant or a publicist who murmured something near Elena's ear and then withdrew. A man Nathan recognized from earlier, he had delivered a short speech about the charity's goals. Standing at the podium with practiced authority crossed the room toward them. A group of 3 women who had been standing near the east wall began to migrate without appearing to migrate. Nathan stayed in his chair and watched. What struck him was how quickly the coat disappeared. Not literally. Elena was still wearing it. The damp wool, the small tear at the pocket, but nobody seemed to see it anymore. The same garment that had made her worth dragging toward a door 40 minutes ago was now simply not being registered by eyes that had recalibrated themselves around a last name. He watched a woman offer Elena a glass of champagne with the warm deference of someone performing a gift. He watched a man pull a chair close and begin speaking with the eager leanness of someone who needs something. He watched the guard, the first one, D. Hartley, standing near the wall with his eyes slightly averted, performing the very specific blankness of someone who hopes not to be remembered. And he watched Elena. She was composed, as she had been composed throughout. She responded to people. She was gracious, which was different from warm. There was a professional distance to it, the distance of someone who had grown up around this and knew its true temperature. She did not look angry. She did not look vindicated. She looked, if anything, tired. Once, across the press of people who had suddenly found reasons to be near her, she looked at Nathan. He was already looking at her. She held the look for a moment. Then she returned her attention to the man who was speaking to her. Nathan put on his jacket. It was a natural motion he didn't stand, didn't make a production of it, just reached back and pulled his jacket from the chair and shrugged into it, the way you do when you've decided something quiet and have already moved past the decision. He thought about Emma at home with Patricia next door. The key found or the key produced from wherever it had fallen, probably asleep by now with a book face down on her chest the way she always was. He thought about the drive back down the mountain in the snow, the careful patient work of it, the clean focus required. He thought about the garage, which would need him at 6:30 in the morning because Kevin had called in Wednesday, and the alignment work on the Callaway truck was still unfinished. He thought about the fact that a room full of people had watched a woman be dragged toward a door in a blizzard and had not moved. and that the same room was now competing for proximity to her, and that the only thing that had changed was 3 syllables. He stood up. Elena noticed the moment he stood. She was in the middle of a sentence addressed to a man named Garrison Holt, a senior partner at a venture firm, who had materialized at her side with the smoothness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment all evening. She had been giving him approximately 40% of her attention, the 40% required to respond coherently, while the other 60 noted the slight shift in posture at the corner of the room where Nathan Cole's chair was. She excused herself. Garrison Holt was not the kind of man who was accustomed to being excused from, but she did it with enough grace that it took him a few seconds to understand it had happened. She reached Nathan's table as he was buttoning his jacket. "You're leaving," she said. "Yes. Why?" He looked at her, and then he looked at the room, and the look was the answer, not an accusation, not a speech, just an honest direction of his attention toward what the room had become in the last 20 minutes, and then back at her to make sure she had followed the same line. She had. "Because they only respect you now," he said. She stood still for a moment. The noise of the room moved around them, conversation, laughter, the clink of glass on glass. Garrison Holt was already redirecting toward a different target. Richard Blake was at the champagne table with his back carefully turned. Thomas Aldrich was in the far corner speaking into his phone. "They didn't respect you an hour ago," Nathan continued. He said it without heat. "You walked through a blizzard alone and came in through the front door like anyone else, and they were." He stopped, looked for the right word. "They were what they were." He paused. "I didn't help you because of your last name. I didn't even know your last name. I know that. I know you know it." He looked at her steadily. "I just didn't want to still be sitting there when it stopped being true." Elena Ward looked at him for a long moment. She was a woman who had grown up understanding, in the particular way that children of powerful families understand, that almost every person who smiled at her was smiling at something more than her. She had learned at 17 that her friendships required a kind of vigilance, a constant, low-level attention to what people wanted and whether what they were offering was real. She had gotten good at it. She had, at 31, become so good at it that she sometimes struggled to turn it off even when she was alone. Nathan Cole, a man she had known for approximately 2 hours, had stepped into the path of 2 security guards for her without knowing her name, without knowing anything about her, without the possibility of any return on the gesture, and was now leaving the room precisely because the room had changed around her in a way that made staying feel like something he didn't want to be part of. She could not immediately think of another person who would have done both things. "Emma," she said. He looked at her, slightly surprised she'd remembered. "Your daughter. That's why you're going." "Partly." He was honest about it. But not only. She nodded. She stepped back, giving him room. He moved past her toward the door and then stopped, half-turned. "I hope you find what you came here for," he said. "The man you were looking for, Douglas Crane." She almost smiled. "He wasn't here after all. I'm sorry. He'll surface. They always do." She looked at Nathan. "Drive carefully. The roads down the mountain will be bad." "I know." He turned up his collar. "I've driven them before." She watched him walk to the door. She watched him push it open against the resistance of the wind, and for a moment the cold came in real and sharp, the cold of the actual world outside, and then the door closed, and he was gone, and the room continued its noise and warmth all around her, as if the door had never opened. She stood at his table for a moment longer. Then she looked at the empty chair. The glass of water he'd been drinking from was still there, half full, a ring of moisture on the white tablecloth beside it. The small evidence of a person who had been there and was no longer there, the specific material trace of someone who does not make a theatrical exit but simply leaves. She sat down in her own chair. She looked at the glass. Around her, people continued to move and speak and perform the careful work of being seen. Garrison Holt made another pass. She saw him recalibrate and redirect, and she deflected him gently and without explanation. A woman she recognized from her father's foundation events stopped to say something warm that Elena returned with equal warmth and no particular feeling. She was thinking about a man driving down a mountain in the snow. She was thinking about a question that would not leave her alone. What is the actual worth of a gesture that costs you nothing? And what is the worth of a gesture that costs you exactly the thing you were afraid to lose? The moral simplicity of having helped someone before the complications arrived. She did not know Nathan Cole. She had sat across from him for 2 hours, and she could not have told you his opinion on almost anything that the guests at this gala would have considered important. She didn't know his politics, his ambitions, his financial situation beyond the thin picture painted by a struggling small-town auto shop. She didn't know who he voted for, or where he went on vacations, or whether he went on vacations, or what he thought about the things powerful people argued about in well-lit rooms. She knew that he had told the truth when he said he hadn't been thinking much. She knew that the truth was the rarest thing in rooms like this one. She knew that she was going to sit here for another 20 minutes, say what she needed to say to the people who would now be easier to say things to, and then go out into the cold. She knew where the garage in Garfield was. She had looked it up on her phone within 10 minutes of Nathan sitting down beside her, with the habit of someone who checks things, who verifies, who never fully stops being careful. Cole's Automotive, on Route 9, east of the junction. A website with a photo of the building and the kind of straightforward description that belongs to a person who does not believe in selling themselves. She had not told him that. The snow was serious on the road down the mountain. Nathan drove the way he drove everything, with steady, unhurried attention, both hands on the wheel, headlights cutting a white corridor through the dark. He had good tires. He had replaced them in October because October in Colorado is when you replace your tires, no matter what. He knew the road, he had driven it in summer and in this, and the mountain didn't change, only the light and the surface. He thought about Emma. He had texted Patricia before leaving the hotel, and she had replied almost immediately. Emma had found the key herself, in the pocket of her school bag, where she had apparently put it for safekeeping, and then safe-kept it so well she forgot. She was in bed. Patricia had checked twice. She had sent a small photograph his daughter asleep on her side, one arm out of the covers, her book closed and set on the nightstand with the deliberate tidiness of someone who respected books. He had looked at the photograph for a long moment in the parking garage before starting the car. He thought about the gala on the way down. He thought about it with the specific quality of attention he gave to things he was trying to understand, not to reach a verdict, but to look at it honestly. He had not done anything remarkable. He had stood up and said 3 words and sat down. The scale of it, to him, was small. He had not risked anything beyond a moment of awkwardness with a security guard, and awkwardness was not a thing Nathan had ever spent much energy fearing. What stayed with him was the room, the way it had moved. He had been in rooms before where people changed their posture around new information. It happened in the garage, sometimes when a customer drove up in a certain kind of car, or when someone dropped a name but the speed of it tonight had been something else. The precision of the reversal, the absolute completeness of it. He thought about Elena's face during those 20 minutes. The composure of it, which he understood now, was not the composure of someone who was fine, but the composure of someone who had practiced being fine in exactly these circumstances, who had learned that the alternative was worse. He thought about what it would do to a person, years of it, knowing that every room was measuring you against a name rather than you, knowing that any kindness might be an investment, any friendship a calculation. He tried to imagine raising Emma in that, and felt something cold that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He crossed the junction at the bottom of the mountain, and the road flattened out, and the town of Garfield appeared in pieces through the snow. The gas station, the feed store, the diner with its neon still on at this hour, a warm orange blur in the dark. He drove past them all with the familiar fondness of a person who has made peace with where they live, which is different from love but shares some of its warmth. He pulled into his driveway at 10:47. He sat in the car for a moment. He had told her, "I didn't help you because of your last name." He had said it because it was true. He had also not been thinking, when he said it, about whether it would land as wisdom or as accusation or as something else entirely. He had simply said the true thing, which was one of his small, reliable habits. He went inside. He checked Emma. She was asleep exactly as Patricia's photograph had shown. One arm out, book on the nightstand. He adjusted her covers and turned off the lamp in the hallway outside her door. He went to bed. He lay there for a while in the dark, with the snow ticking against the window, and thought about nothing in particular. And then he was asleep. 2 days later, he got up at 6, made coffee, walked Emma to the bus stop in the pale winter light, came back and changed into his work clothes, opened the garage, and began his day. Kevin arrived at 7:15. The alignment work on the Callaway truck got finished by 10. A woman came in at 11 with a strange rattling sound that turned out to be nothing more complicated than a loose heat shield. A regular customer, Bill Forsyth, brought coffee cake his wife had made and left it on the counter without explanation because that was what Bill Forsyth did. It was an ordinary day. Nathan was good at ordinary days. He had built a life out of them, which was not the same as settling. It was more like understanding that the ordinary contains things that the extraordinary doesn't, and that a Tuesday, when your daughter laughs at breakfast and the heat shield job goes smoothly and there is unexpected coffee cake, is not a smaller day than any other. At 2 in the afternoon, a black SUV pulled up in front of the garage. He saw it through the window. He wiped his hands on a rag. Elena Ward had spent the day after the gala in a hotel suite at the Grand Aurora, not because she had planned to stay the night, but because the roads had been closed until 6 in the morning and then opened to limited traffic, and by the time they were fully passable, she had already had 3 phone calls that required her full attention and 1 that required most of it. The first was from her father. Alexander Ward called at 7:48 in the morning, which meant he had known about the previous night by at least 7:30 and had taken 18 minutes to decide how to approach the call. Elena knew her father well enough to understand this. He did not make calls in anger. He was a man who believed that information, properly collected and processed, rendered anger unnecessary. He called when he was ready. "Thomas Aldrich called me," he said. "I imagine several people did." Elena. A pause, the particular pause that contained a decade's worth of conversations about her habit of going places alone, without security, without warning. The roads in Aspen, in December, were exactly what I expected them to be. "Did you find Douglas Crane?" "No." "He wasn't there." Another pause. "He's in Phoenix until Thursday." "I could have told you that. I know." She looked out the window at the white street below. "I wanted to handle it myself. Crane is not someone who responds to being handled." "I know that too." She moved the phone to her other hand. "I'll deal with it through the appropriate channels." "It's fine, Dad." He was quiet for a moment. When Alexander Ward was quiet, it meant he was deciding something. "Aldrich mentioned a man," he said. "Someone who apparently, Dad, intervened, is the word he used. Dad. Firmer. I'm handling it." Another pause. "All right." And then, with the simplicity of a man who had learned that his daughter had edges he needed to respect. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Good. A beat. I'll have the car come for you by 10. I'll be downstairs by 9:30. She had the car drop her at her apartment in Denver rather than the office. She changed. She made herself eat. She sat at her kitchen table for an hour with her laptop open and the cursor blinking and did not write the emails she was supposed to write. She thought about Nathan Cole. This was not the first time she had thought about him since the previous evening. She had, in fact, been thinking about him with the particular persistence of something that will not be filed away until it has been properly examined. She tried to examine it honestly. Was this gratitude, which would be understandable, or was it something less simple? She had met many people who had done kind things for her. She had met many more who had done kind things in her direction while doing them, in truth, for her name. Nathan Cole's kindness had the quality of kindness that did not know it was being watched, which was the rarest quality, because even kindness performed in private often knows it is being observed by the person performing it. He had stepped into the path of the guards before he had a chance to calculate anything. There had been nothing to calculate. She had been, to him, a stranger in a wet coat. The calculation that most people would have made, what will this cost me? What do I gain? How will this look? Had simply not occurred in the gap between seeing and moving. There had been no gap. She had spent a lifetime developing the ability to identify that gap in people. She had never seen anyone close it that completely. And then he had left, not because he was offended, not as a performance of principled departure, but because the thing that had made the room comfortable for him was the thing it had become, and he had not wanted to stay in it. She thought about Emma asleep with her book on the nightstand. She thought about a man who had said, "I'm always somewhere between where I am and where she is," as if this were simply a description of his life and not one of the most honest things she had heard a person say in years. On the morning of the second day, she drove herself north. The roads were clear. She told no one where she was going. She had her phone and her coat, a different one, heavier, and she drove the way she had always driven when she needed to think. A little too fast on the empty stretches, slowing on the curves, the radio off. She found Route 9 east of the junction, which she had looked up. She found the sign. Cole's Automotive Honest Work. Fair price. She pulled over and sat for a moment. Then she turned in. Nathan had the hood up on a 09 Jeep Commander when the SUV pulled in. He saw it through the windshield of the Jeep, the black paint. Clean except for the road salt from the mountain roads, the kind of vehicle that comes with certain kinds of lives. He watched it park and waited to see who got out, because you could tell a lot from how someone got out of a car. She got out the way she had walked into the gala. Purposefully, no hesitation on the threshold between the car and the world outside it. She was wearing a long coat, dark, and no one was with her, no driver, no assistant, no one. She closed the door herself. She looked at the garage. Then she looked at Nathan. He set down the wrench he'd been holding. He had not expected this. He had not allowed himself to expect it. In his experience, and he had a specific kind of experience in this, the experience of a man who had learned not to want things that were not his, the beautiful gestures ended when they ended. You did something decent, and the story was over, and the person went back to their life, and you went back to yours. That was how it worked. That was the appropriate conclusion. Elena Ward was walking toward his garage. He came out to meet her, wiping his hands again on the rag he still had in his back pocket, a habit so deep it happened without thought. She stopped a few feet from him. "Hi, Nathan," she said. "Hi." She looked at the garage behind him, the sign, the bays, the equipment he could see through the open door. "Honest work. Fair price," she said, reading the sign. "It's accurate." She looked at him. "I came to say thank you. You already said it." "I said it in the moment." She met his gaze. "I mean it more clearly now." He looked at her for a moment. Snowmelt ran in thin lines along the edge of the parking lot. The sky was white and enormous. Kevin was somewhere in the back of the garage and had not yet noticed they had a visitor, which meant the quiet would last until he did. "How did you know where I was?" Nathan asked. "I looked it up." She said it without embarrassment. "The night of the gala. I wanted to know if you were who I thought you were." "What did you find?" "A garage in Garfield with good reviews and a 3-star Google rating because someone gave you 1 star for being closed on Sundays." The corner of his mouth moved. "Mrs. Pettigrew." "She needed her oil changed." "We were closed." "You remember that specifically?" "She told me about it in person. Twice." Elena smiled, and this time it went all the way. Not the small surprised laugh of 2 nights ago, but a full, unhurried smile. The kind that does not require anything from the person receiving it. It changed her face in a way he had been aware was possible since the first time she had laughed at his table and put her fingers to her lips. I also found your reviews, she said. The real ones. People say you're the most honest mechanic in Garfield County. Garfield County is not a large sample size. Honest is honest. He looked at her steadily. Why did you really come? She was quiet for a moment. Not deflecting, considering. Because I've spent my whole life in rooms full of people who calculate everything, she said. And you were the first person I've met in I don't know how long who didn't calculate anything. She paused, and I wanted to see what that looked like outside of a room full of people calculating. He thought about this. This is mostly what it looks like, he said. Jeep Commander with an exhaust manifold leak. Coffee from a machine in the back that makes bad coffee. Tuesdays. I can work with Tuesdays. He looked at her carefully. He was a man who was cautious, not timid. There was a distinction, and he had learned his caution from specific places, from a marriage that had ended in the particular way of marriages that end not with violence or betrayal, but with the slow discovery that two people have been living parallel lives and mistook proximity for connection, from years of doing the work that his work required, which was understanding that a problem rarely presented itself as what it actually was. He did not know what Elena Ward wanted from a man with a 3-star Google rating and a bad coffee machine in Garfield, Colorado. He knew what he saw, which was a woman who had driven herself an hour from wherever she had started, with no one with her. To stand in front of a garage, she had looked up on her phone at a gala because she wanted to see something outside of a room. My daughter gets home at 3:15, he said. She's going to want to know who you are. Elena looked at him. What will you tell her? I'll tell her the truth. He folded the rag in his hand, an automatic gesture. That you're someone I met. That you came to say hello. And if she asks more questions, she will ask more questions. She always does. He looked at Elena. We can answer them honestly. She held his gaze. Outside, a thin wind moved through the gap between the buildings and lifted a small spiral of dry snow from the parking lot and set it down again a few feet away. I'd like that, Elena said. Then come inside, Nathan said. The coffee is bad, but it's hot. She followed him in. The garage smelled of oil and cold metal and the particular working warmth of a space where real things got fixed. Kevin appeared from the back bay, took one look at Elena Ward standing near the tool bench in her long coat, and became very interested in something on the far wall that required his immediate attention. Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine. He handed her one. She wrapped both hands around it. Outside, through the garage door, the January sky sat low and white over Garfield, Colorado, and the snow that had fallen 2 nights ago over the Grand Aurora Hotel was still on the ground here, still clean, still quietly present. The same snow that had clung to her boots and been ignored by a room full of people, and noticed by one man sitting near the back with a glass of water and a plan to leave early. It was still there. Some things, once fallen, stay. Emma Cole came home at 3:22, 4 minutes late, because she had stopped to look at something on the walk from the bus stop, and Emma frequently stopped to look at things. She came through the garage side door the way she always did, bypassing the house entirely, dropping her backpack near the tool bench with the ease of a child for whom this space was as ordinary as the kitchen. She was wearing a purple knit hat with a small pom-pom that she would have rejected 2 years ago as babyish and had apparently reconsidered. She had her mother's eyes and Nathan's way of being in a room, unhurried, observant, already taking in the fact that something was different before she had consciously named what it was. She stopped. She looked at Elena, who was sitting on the old stool near the parts cabinet, her coat folded over her knee, the coffee cup still in both hands. Then she looked at her father. He was watching her with the slightly braced expression of a parent who loves their child's curiosity and is also slightly afraid of it. Emma looked back at Elena. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Elena said. "I'm Emma. I know. I'm Elena." Emma considered this. Then, with the terrible directness of an 8-year-old, "Are you my dad's friend?" Nathan cleared his throat. "I'm becoming one," Elena said. "I hope." Emma nodded slowly, processing. Do you know about cars? A little. Dad knows everything about cars, Emma said, with the complete confidence of someone delivering an established fact. He fixed Mr. Forsyth's truck when everyone else said it was totaled, and he taught me what the different warning lights mean. That's useful to know. The oil one is important. People always ignore it. Emma said this with the gravity of someone who had seen the consequences. You shouldn't ignore it. I won't, Elena said. Emma seemed to decide something. She picked up her backpack, redistributed it on her shoulder, and looked at her father with the look that meant she was done with the formal portion of her assessment and had reached a conclusion. Is she staying for dinner? She asked. Nathan looked at Elena. Elena looked at Nathan. If that's all right, Elena said. We're having pasta, Emma said, as if this were relevant information that could change things. Dad makes it from scratch on Tuesdays, not from a box. She tilted her head toward her father. Because he says the box kind is a different thing. It is a different thing, Nathan said. It's still good, Emma said, fairly. It is still good. Elena was watching this, the specific ordinary warmth of it. The particular frequency on which a father and a daughter who know each other very well speak to each other, the shorthand built from years of Tuesdays and pasta and bad coffee and reading the warning lights. She had grown up in houses with cooks and staff, which was not the same as bad, only different. She had eaten well in rooms where no one knew the coffee was bad because the coffee was always excellent. She felt something loosen in her chest that she had not fully known was tight. I would love to stay for dinner, she said. If you'll have me. Nathan turned to start the water. Emma settled at the workbench with her backpack and pulled out something to read, an actual book, thick, the cover too worn to read from across the room, and began reading it with the complete absorption of someone for whom the presence of adults is background music. The garage radio was on low, something instrumental, older, barely audible over the sound of Kevin finishing up in the back bay. Outside, the afternoon light was going silver the way it does in January in Colorado, the sky losing its white and moving toward something colder and more precise. The snow on the parking lot had been tracked through in places, and in others was still entirely unmarked, the clean record of nothing yet having crossed it. Nathan stood at the small sink, filling a pot. He did not look at Elena, but he was aware of her the way you are aware of a change in weather, not urgently, not as something requiring action, but as something real and present that has arrived and is now simply part of the conditions of the day. She was aware of him in the same way. Emma turned a page. Kevin called out from the back that the Jeep was ready. Nathan said he'd take a look in a minute. The water began to run. It was a Tuesday in January in a garage in Garfield, Colorado, and it was, by any objective measure, an entirely ordinary thing. It was not ordinary at all. Outside, the snow held its shape in the silence, the way that certain moments hold, not forever. Nothing holds forever, but long enough to be what they are, long enough to be remembered as the moment when a room full of people chose to look away, and one man near the back stood up, and the thing that was set in motion by that small and unannounced decision found its way, through 2 days of snow and silence and a bad coffee machine, to a Tuesday that neither of them had planned. Honest work. Fair price. And sometimes, if you were still there when the calculations stopped, something truer than any of it.